we republished last year because it dealt with the experimental medical procedure that was recommended, and those who denied or decided not. Yeah, there were camps involved and all sorts of other things. It suddenly became a lot more relevant than it had been back in 2005. But I had to change some of the theology because of things that have changed since then, the things that I've learned since then. Yeah. And Sharon said, the same thing is true with the earlier novels like Winds of Evil and Signs and Wonders, which we're probably going to republish by the end of this year. But it is interesting when you're trying to reach for that and teach and not really understanding the theology behind it. What's really interesting, and Nick, I'm curious about this, especially since you're writing for a younger audience. Do you find is what Jonathan said to be true for you as well? Like, how is your better understanding of theology affected your ability to create characters and write this fantastic fiction for younger readers?
Well, that's a good question. When the series first started, it was really just a story that my son and I were making up together. He wanted me, he was 8 years old at the time. I read to him every night at bedtime. And one night he wanted a break from the routine and asked if we could just make up something together. And so I just started making up something. I thought of a magic timepiece. There's this boy. I let him name the character. And when he sets the timepiece to 1 o'clock, it magically takes him to this fantasy world. And by the end of us doing that for 2 hours, I said, okay, that's the end of the 1 o'clock world. I'm tired. We're going to do 2 o'clock tomorrow night. No, I want to do 2 o'clock. No, we're going to do 2 o'clock tomorrow night. So the next night, we made up a 2 o'clock world and so forth. So it went on for about 2 weeks. And every night he was just so interested in what was going to happen next, what the next world would be, that my wife said, hey, you should really think about maybe self-publishing this, like turn it into a book for other kids to enjoy. So I did, made some slight edits here to the plot, here and there. But really, I wasn't trying to tell a story. I wasn't trying to set up something that would have an altar call at the end. That's not the intention of the book. I was desperate for something that was, a fantasy. It was engaging. It gave kids an adventure, and it had values that parents could trust their kids to expose their kids to. Loyalty to friends, being brave, realizing you can't be brave if there's no fear. Just good themes, strong thing, doing the right thing no matter what. Yeah. As you'll see at the end of the book, the main character has a really, really hard decision to make.
Yeah, it's awesome.
He can either make a decision that he knows deep, deep, deep down is the right thing to do, or he can make the alternate decision against his conscience and be a part of this group of child heroes, these friends that he's been dying to have in his life, and he finally finds his tribe, so to speak. So he's got to make a really, really hard choice. And then so it's those themes that I want kids to read and be exposed to and have a great story that they can get lost in a fantasy world. It's funny because when I read the Chronicles of Narnia, like so many people did, as a kid, I was unaware of the theology until, the stone table cracked and Aslan came back from the grave. I was like, oh, I recognize this. Oh, so that's what's going on. But up to that point in the first book, I was just like, man, this is an amazing fantasy story, and which is why I love Lord of the Rings so much. You have to really, really try hard and do some gymnastics to extract gospel messaging from the Lord of the Rings.
But there's no logos there.
That's right. There's the themes of it's logos driven, 100%. But it's a beautiful, wonderfully spun story, and you're always rooting for those who are true, those who are brave, those who are just trying to save their friends,
right?
And I wanted that. I wanted a piece of that in my book. So I wasn't looking for an altar call per se. Unlike my first and only so far venture into young adult writing, I wrote a paranormal urban fantasy for young adults called Henry Half Moon, and it is a mix of Greek gods. There's Christianity in there. There is the Anunnaki. Even the Babylon working is mentioned. So I'm throwing all of these really weird things in there.
It's right up your alley, Derek.
And he's
you would really like it. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you read it, you're going to be like, oh no, this isn't how things work. This is not what that meant. Yeah. But I'm taking elements and I'm creating this fantasy, this story. But in that one, it was very evident at the end that the real God, the true God behind everything that was going on was Christ. This was Jesus that was in control of this. Jesus is the one that essentially called Henry to basically be a demon slayer in the other realm. Yeah. And kind of a Grim Reaper type, only his job is to slay, gargoyle-esque demons
from the abyss.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. But even Henry doesn't know that. He doesn't want to believe. He's cynical.
Yeah.
His parents were trying to raise him that way. He doesn't believe all that. He knows there's just more out there.
Typical college
Who knows
kid.
what the real truth is, but there's something more there than what people will believe. And then he goes on this fantastic journey, and only at the end.
Which is a cool spiritual journey.
Yeah, only at the end is he like, now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah. Now, mom and dad were right.
Yeah. So in a way,
right about Jesus, and I've just been a jerk this whole time.
In a way, and this is highly, this is not theologically accurate, but in a way, there is kind of an altar call. But imagine an altar call after you die, which is like nobody's gonna be like, that's not how it is. But I'm not trying to write a theologically accurate story. I'm not trying to fit this into a theological framework. I'm trying to tell a great story, and in that case, that points people to directly to Christ at the end.
And that's the thing. If you can point people to the Bible, if you can point people to Christianity, to Jesus, then and as long as you're not directly trying to interfere or interpose fictional elements onto what the Bible says, you can create something that deals in the spaces of silence, where, it's not really talked about a whole lot, or it's super interpretive. Like what Nick deals with is kind of some of the stuff in Revelations with Henry Halfmoon, and then what I deal with, is like the visions that people have seen of these angels. It's like, well, are you a literalist, or is this interpretive, or, is this metaphorical somehow? And it's in those like gray areas that I think you can sort of get away with crafting your own story that you're capable of telling that still gives the message without violating anything, and because that's super important. You don't want to stand in violation of whatever the Bible says, because that defeats the whole point. The whole point is to make people say, wow, yeah, Henry Halfmoon's journey is kind of like, my journey in a not so literal way,
Well, Henry Halfmoon and the Travelers League series for the middle grade, there were the stories that, I wanted to read. They were the type of story that I wanted to read, that I thought was lacking out there. Something that was willing to, violate the established rules of what Christian fiction is supposed to be, and violate it without offense in a way. Like just not try to follow the norm. I want that fantasy. I want that fun fantasy. I want that fun paranormal element to the story, without people feeling like they're reading something that's going to be a danger or detriment to their faith, or their children's faith in any way, and it's not.
No.
What kind of feedback have you gotten on the creative aspects of your writing? And I ask this because one of the reasons we began investigating self-publication back as early as 2005 was because the publisher, who was a traditional Christian publishing house dipping its toes into the water of fiction back around that time, they had published Sharon's first novel, Winds of Evil. The second novel was getting close. They'd also, had they done the Armageddon Strain? I think they had. And they were editing my first novel, The God Conspiracy, and they were just getting really kind of squeamish. You guys have crop circles and UFOs in here, and government conspiracies, which we learned were much more popular during the Clinton years among Christian publishers than during the George W. Bush years. So we just said, okay, fine. We'll just, say thanks. It's been a good experience. We'll move on. for the most part, people have been very positive about the storylines and the theology that's in there. Admittedly, not perfect theology, but what kind of response have you gotten from the creative aspects? Are there what kind of pushback? What kind of encouragement?
Well, do you want to go or?
Sure. Yeah.
We'll take you go first, and then I'll
mine
go.
Mine was so I first attempted to get published in 2005. And then I attempted again in 2008, kept writing during that time. But 2005 was when I finished the first draft of Empyrean Falling, which was a nightmarish 1,147-page brick. Yeah, so no wonder. But both times that I was rejected by pretty much every publishing company, it was like, the secular publishers won't touch anything that's overtly Christian, and my stuff has always been overtly Christian. The Christian publishers didn't want to touch anything that I had written because it was too violent. Because these are right. It's like Gladiator. I mean, they got swords, they got shields. They like those things do things, and they didn't like it because. Lucifer, trying to remember how they put it. Lucifer was problematic to certain Christian publishers because he had teeth in his arguments. He's ultimately wrong, and it boils down to the theme of the book of the first book, which is replace fear with faith. Lucifer / Satan operates out of fear and pride, and Michael operates out of faith and humility, and because of that, Michael's the good guy, and anyways, so but they didn't like it because it wasn't that feel good kind of warm and fuzzy sort of Amish lady in the countryside fiction that right. We were talking about. It's it kind of was its own sort of animal. So and they just didn't think it was very marketable. And in a way, when you look at sales, they were kind of right. It is very niche, you know. I've had a lot of great feedback and experiences from a lot of men, which makes sense because I wrote the whole 7-novel series from the time I was 17 to the time I was 26 or 28. 27-ish.
Over a decade. I mean, it's a huge body of work.
Yeah, and I took time off. I actually owe my ability to publish on Amazon to Nick because I had given up, and then Nick published in 2018. Is that right?
Yep.
The year Mom died, and I saw him do it, and like how it was back in the day, Derek. Like self-publishing was just an expensive vanity project.
Right. Yeah.
There was, what I mean? Like if you couldn't get published through a traditional publisher back in all the way up to probably the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s, you were sunk. It was either that or you're like the crazy person at the UFO expo with the pamphlet of, moon documents in a binder, So it just, I had given up basically. And but I realized that those books, my niece told me she got into the first one and she was like, "Oh, this is a boy book." I'm like, "Yes, of course it's a boy book. It's about warrior angels, fighting each other and like they're all dudes, Yeah. So I've had a lot of good feedback from fighting age males, which is kind of who these books are written for, which is kind of a detriment because fighting age males are too busy working.
Saying there's no romance?
You know what? In Sturm and Drang, there's romance.
Very good.
Because that's the one about the flood. So it's not great romance, but it's there, because it's angels and women. Yeah. But it is there you go. It's still powerful. That my experience, my feedback was, like I said, I did have some people who were upset that the angels didn't look like their literal depictions in the Bible at certain times, that they were anthropomorphized. And then I had some people who couldn't connect with it because the target audience was me in a way, just like with Nick talking about he wanted to write stuff that he wanted to read. I wanted the same thing. When I was 17, the reason why the whole thing got started with Heavenly Realms is I saw my friends and I snuck into a movie theater to watch Dogma, Kevin Smith's movie. You know, and that scene where Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who are the fallen angels, have that argument in the parking garage, and they're talking about a war on God, was like a scene out of a whole other movie. And we were